Welcome, everyone. I'm Bruce Brown, and I'm president of the Reporters Committee. And I'm very grateful that people took time out from what is a very busy time of the year and a very busy news cycle out there to be with us this afternoon. As you know, Reporters Committee is a legal services nonprofit that is dedicated to providing free legal support to journalists. And there is a very wide range of things that we do daily to support newsrooms. But among our legal programming activities, there's really nothing as important as the work we do with journalists together to ensure that the public has access to the kind of core public records in their communities to understand what government is undertaking in their name. And today we have for you I guess what we would call at Reporters Committee, an anatomy of a case, where we are very fortunate to be joined by Marisa Kabas, who is publisher of the Handbasket, and Adam Marshall, director of national litigation at Reporters Committee. And they are going to take you through a case that Adam and the team at Reporters Committee handled for Marisa that revealed very important details about one of the very early stories coming out of the Trump administration last year involving a the DOGE takeover of the U.S. Institute of Peace here in Washington. And Adam, who is coming to us live from the Rothko room in his home in DC, I would love to turn it over to you to get us going. And I want to thank Marisa and Adam, Michael Zwern and Sydney Brown, who did so much to put this together at Reporters Committee, and all of you for joining us here today. Adam, off to you.
Thanks. And I'm in turn gonna shunt it to Michael for a couple housekeeping items before we get going, and then I will take
Certainly.
over.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Bruce and Marisa. A very quick moment of housekeeping and logistics. I'm Michael. I'm the Vice President of Development. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you especially for Marisa for volunteering her time. Just a few items on the Zoom because we anticipate these sorts of questions. Yes, this will be recorded. Yes, we will publicize it later for people who aren't able to attend in real time. And in furtherance of Sydney's message in the chat, for those of you who have questions for Marisa or for Adam or for the two of them, please put them in the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And my colleagues Marguerite and Sydney will review the questions and will relay them to Marisa and Adam during the Q&A portion. But again, thanks to everyone for joining. We're already up to 50 some attendees and we appreciate it. I'd like to kick it off by just asking Marisa, how did this lawsuit come about? What's the U.S. Institute of Peace? What happened to it? And how did you get involved as an independent journalist in finding out what happened to it in March 2025?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. I first heard about the U.S. Institute of Peace while the raid was actually happening, while it was in progress. This was in March of last year, and there had been sort of a pre-raid on a Friday, and then that Monday, kind of all hell broke loose. And for background, the USIP is an independent nonprofit that was established by Congress during the Reagan administration. So it owns its own property. The building is theirs. They operate independent of the government. They do their own thing, but they do get some government funding. And so the fact that DOGE was coming into their building specifically was remarkable because they weren't just your typical government agency. And it wasn't the first DOGE raid either. They had gone into many agencies at that point and kind of just kicked people out of their offices and their jobs and took over. But this one was a little bit different because the DC Metropolitan Police were called to respond to the confrontation between DOGE and the people who worked within the U.S. Institute of Peace. And what unfolded was a very confusing confrontation where no one really seemed to know what was going on. But what I realized after reporting on it and reflecting on it is that this was unique because the police were there and they would have body camera footage. And so 2 days after the raid, I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the DC Metropolitan Police for that footage. I plot twist, I didn't get it. And so I had to eventually turn to litigation. But at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. I hadn't planned on going any further with it.
Thank you, Marisa. That's exactly the stage that we're setting in March 2025 and the immediate aftermath. So, Adam, how did the Reporters Committee get involved, and when did you and Marisa first connect about the need for legal support to pursue this public records request?
Yeah. So, a lot of people that we end up representing on the legal team of the Reporters Committee reach out through our hotline or email us. We have so many ways that people, are just crying out for help so often. That's especially true on the public records front, which ends up being a huge chunk of our litigation docket. Marisa was a little bit different because when this was happening, and when I first learned about the Handbasket and Marissa's reporting, I was actually on paternity leave. So I was sitting there kind of nap trapped with my infant son, and I was, doom scrolling as one does. And I came across the Handbasket and Marissa, and I was just captivated, honestly, by her reporting. I thought that she was getting incredible scoops. She was getting them faster than other people, and she just really had, her finger on the pulse of what was happening in the early days of the Trump administration. And so when I returned from leave, I reached out to her and I said, "Look, I think you're doing really interesting things. If you ever have a FOIA problem, feel free to reach out." And I was thinking probably that Marissa might have a federal FOIA issue at some point, not a DC one, but when she let us know that she had this problem with the MPD, then we thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Let's do that.
Yeah, and I think this illuminates exactly where I think is most fascinating to me, how the two of you determined the legal strategy of suing the District of Columbia for the Metropolitan Police Department's body cam footage. Obviously, this story isn't per se about the District of Columbia and its police force, but because the police are there recording everything, there is a lot of video footage that's potentially available for a litigant. And Marisa and Adam, what did you do to develop and identify the legal strategy that you were going to pursue to get access to the records that you knew existed, because there was plenty of documentation that the Metropolitan Police had been on scene the whole time?
Yeah, so a couple things. In one way, the what transpired at the United States Institute of Peace, yeah, was a war between different federal factions, right? And there's certainly like a huge story there, but I do think that the MPD's involvement is really crucial to understanding the story too, as you'll see later on in some of the clips that we're going to show. The how and why the MPD came to be involved is a really interesting story that if you go to the Handbasket, you can read all about. But when the U.S. Institute of Peace personnel were trying to resist the DOGE entrance, they actually called MPD and they said, "We have people who are trespassing." Um, and they asked them to come down and help them out. Little did they know that the DOGE people had also had the United States Attorney's Office call the MPD and say, "There are people trespassing." So when MPD showed up, both DOGE and the United States Institute of Peace thought that they were responding to their call. And then what I think, Marissa was particularly interested in, I think what is really interesting for me as an attorney is how did the MPD go about deciding who they were going to believe? How did they decide to take sides? And so there's this really interesting, local dimension to it, that is what we ended up pursuing because, as you note, that's where the evidence was. But Marissa, how did you think about that in terms of your reporting?
Well, yeah, I think the involvement of the MPD wasn't clear to me as an important part of this story at first, but as I got deeper into it, I realized that the DC Metropolitan Police are there to represent the people of DC. They're not there to represent the federal government. And they did receive these dueling calls, but really, at the end of the day, they should have been there representing the interests of the workers at the USIP. And something that was interesting, I found out subsequently that we didn't know while we were pursuing the lawsuit was that the MPD was only alerted about the call from the U.S. attorney. They didn't realize upon arriving at the building that they had gotten two different calls. And so what you'll see in a lot of the footage and what we ended up seeing when it was released was that the MPD are clearly acting on behalf of DOGE and the Trump administration and are clearly seeing USIP workers as in the wrong. And so, but that context, we didn't know that. And so that colors a lot of what was going on there. And there was one clip that we unfortunately won't get to today because there were a bunch of really important ones. But when they take the former president of USIP, George Moose, out of his office, he turns to Commander Bagshaw, who is the head of the operation, and says, "We thought you guys were our friends." And I mean, that I don't know if the cops are ever your friends, but I think there was a kind of presumption that they would be there to protect them against the federal government, and that turned out to not be the case.
Yeah, that's to me that is fascinating. And for full disclosure, I think all the Reporters Committee staff on this call are residents of the District of Columbia. So we're all very attuned to the issue about the Metropolitan Police and to whom they're ultimately accountable. One question for Adam. What are the relevant District of Columbia statutes that you identified and pursued in this legal strategy? And how did the DC government fight back against the public records request that you and Marissa submitted?
Yeah, so I mean the prime and operative statute here is the District of Columbia's Freedom of Information Act, which is modeled after the federal FOIA, although contains some key differences. Um, you know, it's funny litigating a body cam case now because about 10 years ago, I remember when the district started wearing body cams for the first time, and there was an effort by the mayor. This is back in 2014, 2015. There was an effort by the mayor to completely exempt DC body cams from the DC FOIA, that was kind of stuck in an emergency budget bill somewhere. And the Reporters Committee at the time and a lot of other civil society groups objected to that, testified, and we beat back the exemption, the wholesale exemption for body cam video. And so it was very gratifying, about a decade later, to actually get to work on one of these cases. And even though there's not a wholesale exemption for body cam footage, there are normal kind of FOIA exemptions that might come into play. And the district used used a few of those. So one of the things that the district said in trying to withhold this video, and I let me also contextualize how much video they were trying to withhold. So it turns out there's about 6 hours of body cam video in total, that the MPD took of their involvement on that day. When they eventually got around to responding to us after we had filed the lawsuit for Marissa, they gave us about 5 minutes of footage. And Marissa has a really illuminating story about that. Marissa, do you recall the tagline or the kind of operative phrase from your story?
I think it was something about a lot of butts, a lot of footage
Yeah.
of butts going up and down
Yeah.
staircases. Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. They gave us a lot of video of people, of police officers videotaping as they walked up and down stairwells inside the United States Institute of Peace. So they gave us 5 minutes out of about 6 hours of footage. And then they said the rest was exempt under a variety of rationales. They claimed that there were privacy interests at stake, including by the DOGE, or on behalf of the DOGE officials. They said that they have a privacy interest in their voice, in their face. And one of the really incredible things that they cited was this federal FOIA case from many years ago, where there was an attempt to access the last moments of the audio of the Challenger astronauts right before they died. And the district cited this as a basis to withhold these DOGE employees' uh, audio, saying that these were kind of analogous privacy interests. Of course, we objected to that. We said the last moments of the Challenger astronauts audio is not quite the same thing as what happened here, although we used slightly more forceful language than that. And full credit to my colleague Allison Viley as well, who was really the lead on this case. She did an incredible amount of briefing in a very short time to respond to the district's arguments. And one thing that Allison and I worked on to also respond to this privacy argument was we got in touch with a lot of the members of the United States Institute of Peace. And we worked with them to actually craft declarations that we supported, or that we submitted rather, in support of Marissa's motion. And they said in these declarations that they didn't consider themselves to have any privacy interests, that this was, kind of an open building, and that the public had a right to know what happened in it. So that ended up being incredibly important. The other part of the privacy argument is that it's in both the DC FOIA and other public record statutes. It's not just, is there a privacy interest? It's, is there a public interest? And as we've all been talking about, there is a huge public interest in this information. And when we got around to having a court hearing on it, the court completely agreed with that. The judge actually ruled from the bench in our favor. And because it's an oral opinion, I'll just read you a little bit of what she said. She said the body-worn camera videos here would show how MPD or local law enforcement navigated competing claims of authority and why they were involved, why they sided with DOGE officials and Mr. Jackson, who is the purported incoming president, over the United States peace officials who had called to report the trespass. So the judge really got our public interest arguments, which was great. The other, main argument that the district raised was that the MPD in accessing the U.S. Institute of Peace was using kind of secret law enforcement techniques. And again, in talking with the USIP personnel who were there and looking at publicly available footage, we said, well, it seems like the secret law enforcement techniques they're talking about are things like using a lock-picking kit or a car opening kit, or using electrical tape to tape over latches on doors. I mean, really basic stuff. And again, once we finally got to a court hearing, the judge said, yeah, none of this is secret.
Thank you, Adam. That's amazing. And first off, if I recall correctly, the first time that you and Marissa ever met in person was in front of the judge, walking into the courtroom for this oral argument that was ultimately in Marissa's favor. Marissa, so you've gone through with Adam, what were your arguments, the public interest, for example, overcoming the privacy complaints, overcoming the District of Columbia's pushback. But once you actually got that full footage, what was your approach as a journalist to approach all this, and what did you discover that you wanted to work into your reporting on what ultimately happened in March 2025?
Yeah, so we ultimately got all 6 hours completely unredacted of the body camera footage. So it was a lot to go through, and I hadn't really been in that particular situation before. So for me, I'm a one-person team. I don't have an assistant. I don't have anyone working with me. So it was really up to me to go through all of it minute by minute. And honestly, I wanted to. I was really excited that, especially after close to a year of working on this, that we finally had it in our hands. And so I was keeping an eye out for certain things that I thought may have happened, but I also just had a really open mind about new things that I might discover, or things that were shocking that we didn't know, which is the whole purpose of getting the footage in the first place. And so one of the things that I really wanted to establish is whether or not DOGE understood that they were trying to take over private property. I thought that was a really important piece of it because unlike other government agencies who are on government property, this was a building that was wholly owned by them. And I think it's worth mentioning that it's a beautiful building and administration that's very into appearances and real estate particularly wanted to take this as sort of like a crown jewel and use it as a place for events and sort of just showcase their greatness. And so there were a few key points where they said clearly that they knew that it was private property. And so when I heard those different parts, that really spoke to me. And then I was just really kind of looking to see how the DOGE people addressed government employees or government adjacent employees, because we'd heard so many stories about these raids and how rude they were to people who've devoted their life to service. And especially a lot of them were very young. The members of the DOGE team never worked in government a day in their life. Many of them were dispatched by Elon Musk, who had somehow found a way into government influence, somehow money. And he was the one who was behind DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. And so what I found really interesting was just the kind of mundane interactions between the DOGE staffers and the people who worked at USIP. I mean, there they are, they're at work, it's their place of work, it's their building. And then these people they have never spoken to before, that they have never heard of before, just come stomping into their building and say, actually, this is ours now. And of course, in any situation, you would find that really alarming. But the entitlement that was expressed by the DOGE people and the complete disregard for the work that USIP does, which is diplomacy and peace building around the world, they didn't care. And frankly, I don't think they had any idea of what USIP did. All they knew was Trump want building, we get building. It was pretty much that simple. And yeah, and then other than that, just a lot of lock picking, a lot of like hours of picking locks in a building by people who don't really seem to know how to pick locks very well.
Well, that's a great segue into the first clip, which I would ask Sydney to queue up. And we're also getting some good questions in the Q&A, which we're going to review and we'll talk through in a second. So Sydney, could you please play this first clip? I am not hearing audio. Are people hearing audio?
No.
Okay, we may have a small technical hiccup. Sydney, are we going to try that again in a second?
And do you want me to just set up what the clip is showing?
Yeah, that would actually be really helpful. Put the context up there, please.
Yeah, so on the left side of the screen is Kenneth Jackson, who is going to be the incoming USIP president. No experience in this area whatsoever, just a pal of Trump. And then in the center is Justin Amonetti, who is one of the DOGE lawyers. Also no experience in this field. And then on the right, you'll see Commander Bagshaw, who I mentioned was the head of this operation for the MPD. And this is right before they're going into the building. They're outside the USIP building, and they're showing paperwork to Bagshaw and trying to explain why they are allowed to be busting into this building.
Thank you. And I believe, Sydney, you may need to unmute yourself before you click play on the video.
We have copies of all of them. This is the President Trump terminating all but 3 of the members. Right. Yeah. And those are the 3 remaining board members are the 3 on that resolution.
Okay. So also, is it a GSA building? Because you mentioned GSA contracts.
It's not.
Okay, just on the security.
Private building, and that's why we need MPD.
Got it.
If it were GSA, it would be very simple.
We've been doing this with other buildings, with GSA buildings, much easier.
Got it. With Federal Protective Services, probably, or
yes,
very
simple.
Got it. But this is essentially private property.
That's
right.
the oddball link in the chain for us.
Got it.
Thank you, Sydney. Yes, I hope everyone heard that clearly this time. But yes, you heard them very clearly say, this is private property. It's not a GSA building, not General Services Administration. And as the guy says, that's the oddball link in the chain. They're acknowledging it is a private building, and they're still asking the police to help break into it. So, Adam, as an attorney, what jumps out at you in those 35 seconds of video and audio?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think one of the lessons from this is if you're, seeking to take over a building, wear suits and bring manila folders, because that seems to impart a lot of authority in the minds of the MPD. Um, but, on a more serious note, I mean, when we saw this, it confirmed to us that one of the arguments that we were making in our briefs, Alice and I, was that a lot of the body cam footage in question here was recorded on the public street. You can see that there's literally cars going by. They're on the sidewalk. They're out in public. Any member of the public could have come over and photographed them or videotaped them. And yet the MPD or the district rather, was claiming in their briefing, that there was such a privacy interest here in what was happening that they couldn't possibly release it to the public. And yet here they are. These are public officials of one kind or another on the street, and on a substantive level, I mean, it's really interesting because these are just pieces of paper. Uh, they have, what purports to be, emails from the president terminating members of the USIP board, and then other messages purportedly terminating the presidency of Ambassador Moose. And they're just like, here you go, here's a couple pieces of paper. And the MPD is like, great, sounds good. Let's go take over the building, essentially. And so that's pretty it was just a shockingly banal moment. I would expect a little bit more questions or pushback or requests for verification from law enforcement, but it's pretty short and sweet.
Indeed. And Marisa, so in advance of the second clip that we're going to show, tell us what's going to be happening in this second clip, because it opens up a lot of a lot of boxes of mystery, like what is going on here, and like Adam said, people are just literally showing pieces of paper and saying, well, this says this. What's going on in the second clip that we're about to show?
Sure. So I would say this is sort of the climax of the things that happened that day, especially because almost everyone involved ends up converging in this one kind of basement hallway in the USIP building. The members of DOGE had finally found their way in. Pretty much every police officer who was responding was in the corridor at that point. You'll see the man who's front and center is George Foote. He was the outside counsel for USIP. And then a few of his colleagues are with him. And, I wish we could watch this whole thing, but it's a little bit long. But right before this clip, Foote is speaking with Jackson, who's on the left, and trying to ask questions of Aminetti, the lawyer. And they're not giving him any answers. And Jackson actually says to him, I'm the one asking the questions. And it's very, very tense and very confrontational. And I think this is starting at the point where Foote realizes that they are not being protected by the MPD, that the MPD is there to serve the interests of the Trump administration. And so it's almost in a way they were being forced to surrender.
These folks into the building?
No, we got called in reference to what was going on, so that's how we ended up here.
And if the president of the institute is in his office upstairs, tells you that these are unauthorized intruders, what would you do?
As of right now, Mr. Jackson is the president of the institute.
According to
all the documents that we've seen, the paperwork we've seen.
What are the paperwork that you've seen?
What's that mean?
What's the paperwork that you've seen?
The same paperwork you've been emailing. I think this is how it's going to go down.
Appointing Mr. Jackson as the acting president of the institute.
Okay, but I mean, there are other people on the board.
No, there are not.
Okay.
They've
Well,
all been
thank you
removed.
for your service, and we're gonna move on.
Here's President Trump's
We're gonna move on.
email to the members, previous
lawyer?
members.
Can I have your card?
Not right now.
Okay, are you Jacob?
I am not Jacob. I'm not going to answer any more questions.
I know
but
your
can
name.
you both please
Nice to meet
leave
you.
the institute? No, I don't think we're going to leave.
We're finished here. You're not allowed.
I've been ordered not to let anyone pass you, so please don't walk this way.
And that's 4 of you are not coming back in today. Okay? That's where we are.
You've got guns? I don't. I have personal property upstairs. Did you escort me up to retrieve it?
That'll be a judgment call. We're gonna need to get upstairs first.
There some legal documents, confidential.
Thank you. Wow, that yeah, and there's just so many moments there that, including the "You've got guns, I don't," and then the remark from Mr. Jackson, "We're done here," basically just dismissing the U.S. IP personnel. So this is obviously the big confrontational moment. This is sort of, I guess you would call it, the climax of the confrontation between the DOGE and the U.S. IP people, with the MPD, as you said, Marisa, serving the side of the DOGE folks coming in. What in this video clip emerged for you as a journalist, telling your audiences about what happened behind the scenes once you'd unearthed this footage through the litigation?
I think the line about "you have guns, we don't" is really important because it underlines the complete power imbalance that was going on. I think that, and it's something that I don't think people were thinking of necessarily when DOGE was taking over other agencies. And the fact was that armed law enforcement officers were coming into offices of office workers. They weren't coming up against other law enforcement. They were just people at work, and they're coming in through the door with weapons. And so they're obviously going to feel threatened, and they're obviously going to feel like they can't push back to the same extent that they would probably like to. I mean, you could tell in that clip, George Foote and his assistant counsel, they are feisty, and they were ready to fight, and they were ready to protect the interests of the institute. But there's only so much you can do when people are telling you to shut up, essentially, and then there's a guy standing near you with a gun.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
Adam,
sorry.
go on.
I was just say, second everything, Marisa said. You can see there's one officer in that clip who is standing in the hallway between the USIP people and the rest of the building. And then another officer goes and joins them. And, the speed at which those pieces of paper that people are waving around gets translated into people with guns standing between the personnel and the building that they were just in moments ago is pretty shocking.
Indeed. We have gotten some good questions already submitted through the Q&A function. I would encourage folks to write down other questions for Adam and Marisa in there, and we will relay them. The first question I would actually kick off is, Josh was asking, can you put this in the context of secrecy, the state of FOIA now, and how agencies are increasingly unresponsive to records requests? And maybe, Adam, this is your line of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting talking about the activities of DOGE on this day, because one of the other things DOGE and this administration has done is to dramatically cut back the personnel across the federal government, including at the FOIA offices in each agency that are responsible for responding to records requests. And so it is almost impossible to get any kind of FOIA response from the federal government these days on any, human lifespan timeline. All of the federal FOIA lawsuits that we have filed recently have been predicated just on delay. We can't even get, the agency to deny requests. And so you end up having to sue just to get, the basic administrative process going. And it's incredibly frustrating because the system is so clearly broken. And for that also to now be, evident at the local level here in DC. I mean, the statute here is pretty clear on how long the district has to respond to a request for body cam footage, and they violated that many, many, many times over. So it's just kind of endemic at all levels of government now, and the net effect is that the public keeps having questions and can't get answers.
Yeah. And Marisa, as an independent journalist, how do you address this issue?
Yeah, I was just going to add, this is not something I would have ever been able to pursue on my own had I not worked with the Reporters Committee on it, because as most people know, litigation is lengthy and costly, and I am an independent journalist. My business runs on subscriptions solely, and even though it's going well, and I'm really happy with where things are at, funding a almost year-long lawsuit is probably not something I would be able to withstand. And I think at a certain point, maybe would have not continued going with, considering how long it took. And so there is this real effort to discourage journalists from seeking this kind of information that is ostensibly public. When I asked for the body camera footage, I didn't think I was asking for anything crazy. I think it was a pretty reasonable request. It's supposed to be public footage, public information, and what followed was months and months and months of stalling to obstruct this from being brought to light. And so I think of how many ways this could have not ended up working. And the fact that we ended up actually getting it to work is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And
And Rye has a good question that actually builds on this. Adam, let me read this out loud. This
Yeah.
technique of not even denying the request sounds like what they're doing with immigration related paperwork. What can those people without lawyers do against the technique of just delay, just not respond on all these records requests? Are there class actions? And Rye goes on to say the video is chilling. Thank you for the discussion.
All really good questions. So certainly there have been over the years a variety of class action lawsuits brought against federal agencies predicated on a pattern or practice of delay. But that is a lawsuit, and I think that for a lot of these agencies, a lot of the time, it's really unfortunate, but a lawsuit is the only thing that is going to hold their feet to the fire. I mean, in Marissa's case, I want to I want to say a funny thing about the court hearing when we finally got it, because this was not a close case. When we had the hearing and Marissa and Alice and I met for the first time, the district's lawyer got up and made a very short statement, and the judge pretty quickly asked her, is there really anything that needs to be withheld here? Is there actually anything that's secret? And the district's lawyer kind of fumbled through something. And then my colleague Allison was getting up to argue, and the judge didn't even take argument from us. She was like, "I'm just going to rule for you right now because there is no argument to be had with respect to this." So the fact that there was such a clear case on the law, and the district, even in those circumstances, was fighting us. Was just really, really disheartening. I'm glad, we ended up where we did, but it did take a year and a lot of effort to get there.
And then just from my perspective, being in that situation for the first time and not being a lawyer and just kind of watching along, I was astonished by how little the defense had brought to the table. And the judge asked, can you provide a specific example of why there is a privacy interest in this case? And the opposing counsel was like, no. And then the judge asked, did you even watch all 6 hours of the footage? And she was like, well, most of it. And so the fact that they had such a weak case and they really put in the bare minimum, but yet it still dragged on for so many months and came down to that hearing was just as an outsider pretty illuminating.
Indeed, yeah, and I think that the weakness of the case, and yet it still took a year of legal work on your behalf to get the records, despite the fact that it was largely a meritless claim that the district was making. A couple of attendees, some by name and some without their names, have basically asked, can DOGE be held accountable legally for this kind of attack or takeover of a private institution like USIP, et cetera? I think this is a little bit outside of the world of media law, but I think a lot of people look for accountability. Any quick hot takes, Adam?
Well, so one of the things that happened when DOGE took over is the USIP personnel did file a lawsuit challenging what had happened. They got a favorable ruling in the district court that was stayed by the federal appellate court here in DC and is kind of on hold for the moment. So we don't have a definitive answer yet as to whether there will be that kind of accountability for what happened. But I think a different kind of accountability is transparency, which is exactly what Marisa did in reporting out these videos. I think if there is going to be any understanding of what happened, it has to start with information, and then what happens in terms of other accountability from there is up to the public.
And I
Yeah.
think in the videos that the Doge people, they never expected to have their names out there. They never expected to have their faces out there. They were behaving as if there were no cameras, even though they should have known there were. But they had this air of no of thinking that they would never be held accountable. And so people like Kenneth Jackson and Laken Rapier and Nate Kavanaugh and Justin Amonetti, those are names that we can say now and attach specifically to the Doge raids. Those are faces and names to the crimes, frankly, of Doge. And so what I think is it's still unresolved. Like Adam said, they're still kind of gave control back to the USI people initially and then kind of reversed it. And so for the last year, it's been in the hands still of the Trump administration. And actually, the USI people are waiting on pins and needles for a Supreme Court decision to come down in the Slaughter case on presidential power. And that will help determine whether the president even had the ability to take over the institute.
Yeah, that's a fascinating legal battle. That'll take a long time, I'm sure. A couple of other good questions, and we're gonna aim to wrap up just after 2:45. So we'll try to be quick. But Matthew writes, is there any way of getting some sort of a sanctions in place to incentivize these public agencies to not delay and obfuscate in public records requests in the future? Why would they stop doing it otherwise? I think it's a fairly rhetorical question.
Yeah, so I mean, there are penalties. The DC FOIA and a lot of other public records laws have fee shifting provisions, which say that in the event that you prevail in your lawsuit, you can have your attorney's fees paid essentially by the government. And we did recoup attorney's fees here, although we provide all of our services to journalists pro bono. We do try to recover fees when we can because we think it does have a deterrent effect on government agencies going forward. I mean, sadly, there isn't a whole lot of body cam litigation in the district. Another reason why we wanted to bring this case to help establish more precedent that this type of video needs to be released. But unless the district still has pretty deep coffers, and even a year's worth of lawyers' fees. It may sting a little bit, but I'm not sure how much. So maybe these laws should be strengthened, to provide for further penalties for sure.
Indeed. And Marisa, a question from an anonymous attendee: would you provide the unedited body cam footage to USIP for its archives? I didn't even know that USIP had an archive, so this is news to me. But an attendee asked that question.
I will have to speak to my lawyer about that.
Well, fortunately, we know where to find a lawyer. One last question, also an anonymous attendee: any way to circumnavigate these delay tactics that are being used by the feds, the federal agencies, to just not respond on the record requests? I mean, you said that you can, if it's a pattern in practice of delaying and denying, you can push on that, but what else could you do?
Write your congressperson, I suppose, and ask them to fund the FOIA offices. I mean, these are public records laws, but they have to be implemented by people. There has to be someone on the other end of Marissa's email or my email who is actually going out and looking for records and reviewing them and applying redactions. Like there have to be humans that do this type of thing. And if there's no one in the FOIA office responding, nothing is going to happen. And so these offices need personnel, they need technology, and they also need people suing them for when they transgress the law.
And I'll just add from a non-legal perspective, Public pressure can work. I don't know if it would necessarily work in this case, but I know that in the different things that I've reported, when I have put things on social media or written about them publicly, it does help create demand for something like that. And so in this particular case, I chose not to. I was very cautious about talking about it, actually, which is very hard for me to do. But I kept it under wraps for months because I wanted to wait for the right time to announce the lawsuit and to have the maximum impact, and also not to kind of drag it on for too long. And so, but there were definitely times, and there's a part of me that was like, why don't I just put them on blast? That they keep dragging it out and that they will not provide this footage that the public is entitled to. And so fortunately it didn't come to that in this case, but I mean, it's a somewhat different world in that people do have a voice, a louder voice and a bigger platform than they ever have before.
I think that's certainly true. And with the audience that you've got on social media and on the Handbasket's email list, et cetera, there's definitely an audience that can be leveraged. I want to thank Pam, Mike, Rye, anonymous attendees, multiple, Gary. There's a bunch of more questions that have just come in, and a lot of them are really good, but I also know that we are at 2:45, so I don't want to take too much of people's time, but I do want to make sure that everyone knows where to follow us and to keep up on our respective work. I see Sydney is pasting a bunch of helpful links in the chat. First off, the Handbasket for Marisa is thehandbasket.co. The Reporters Committee is rcfp.org, and you can subscribe to our newsletter at rcfp.org/subscribe. And we are very active, as is Marisa. We're not as active as Marisa on social media, especially Blue Sky, but also LinkedIn, Facebook, and other platforms. And I would just encourage the folks who are attending, maybe you've never heard of the Reporters Committee, maybe you've never heard of the Handbasket, but if you're inspired about what you've heard about how an independent journalist like Marisa can work with a skilled litigator like Adam to unearth these records and to break a big story like this, I encourage you to all to follow the Handbasket, sign up for the Reporters Committee's newsletter. And as Adam said, all this work is supported by private philanthropy, generous donors of all sorts. And if you're willing to support legal defense for journalists and representation for journalists like Marisa who are pursuing these difficult investigations, we welcome your support at rcfp.org/donate. And we always welcome questions. You can reach out to us on the usual platforms. And we are grateful for everyone's interest. And we do intend to do these sorts of webinars featuring our work, our clients, the stories that they're breaking on a more regular basis. And we look forward to seeing many of you in the future. So thank you again to Marisa. Thank you to Adam and Bruce. And thank you especially to Sydney and Marguerite for working on the back end of the technology. We really do appreciate that. And thanks to the many dozens of you who joined today on a busy Thursday afternoon. So thanks all very much. You know how to find us, but rcfp.org and thehandbasket.co. Thanks everyone very much. Take care.